Hello, everybody, and welcome back to episode 33 of the On Deck podcast. I'm your host, Roberto, and today we're going to be going over the World Series. Man, this was quite the entertaining World Series just from the fact of, the talent and how the teams had got here. The Jays had a hard-fought battle, whereas the Dodgers, kind of cakewalked their way through into the World Series. And, today we're just going to be talking and going over the whole series because this had a lot, and I mean a lot of drama to it. So without further ado, let's get started with game one. Game one had started in Toronto with the series starting at the Rogers Center. And man, this was quite an entertaining game because, obviously the Jays had won 11-1 or 11-4, sorry. But this was an absolute dog walk by the Jays. And, I think if you're going to start off a World Series against, I think, everybody's favorite in the Dodgers, this is exactly the start you're looking for, is a game like this. And we had Trey Yesavage go up against Blake Snell in this game. And Yesavage wasn't as sharp as he's been in his previous starts against the Yankees and against the Mariners in previous series, but was still able to give them some depth with 4 innings, only allowing the 2 runs. But, the story of this game had to be hands down the Addison Barger pinch hit grand slam. And it's crazy to think with how long baseball has been played and, just the history of the World Series, that this is the first pinch hit grand slam in World Series history. I think that's pretty cool. I know I had a few of my friends, from whether that be from Seneca Baseball or, my summer team with the Leaside team. Everybody was absolutely going crazy for that grand slam, and watching it on TV, seeing everybody in the crowd going absolutely crazy, and, just hearing the crowd sounds coming back on the TV. I think that would have been an absolutely electric atmosphere to be a part of. And it's pretty cool to see, how many people were in that stadium, like whether that be standing, sitting. I think the majority of the people were standing for the whole game, which is, kind of crazy with how, baseball games are still somewhat long, but to be standing for an entire game in the World Series, that just goes to show you how crazy these Toronto fans are. And it's safe to say that we have the best fans in the world, because you have a whole country supporting one team. And I think that's what makes baseball here in Canada so special, is that everybody backs one team, and that could go from coast to coast. Everybody was rooting for the Jays this series. And, after this game one, it was really apparent that everybody had faith and they weren't really scared of the Dodgers. But with the game one hype over, we move over to game two, and this was all Dodgers. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, basically. This is the Yamamoto game, part 1, actually. After struggling in that first inning, throwing, I think it was 26 pitches, I think it was safe to say that Jays fans were like, yes, we're going to get into this bullpen early. And the Dodgers bullpen, as we saw in game one, wasn't great. This was always a struggle point for this team, especially losing Alex Vesia with some personal issues, and Tanner Scott dealing with, I think it was a back injury or a hip thing. I'm not too sure, but those are 2 big pieces out of that pen that were gone. And for this game, it didn't really matter. Yamamoto was absolutely in control the whole game. He goes CG, which is, nuts, especially in the playoffs. Only allowing 4 hits, striking out 8, and no walks. This was, I think, the first back-to-back complete game since, I think it was Curt Schilling with the Arizona Diamondbacks in the early 2000s. But this was in complete control by Yamamoto. All the pitches were working. The sinker, the splitter, the curveball. He threw a couple sliders, couple cutters, but you never got the same pitch twice to start an at bat. And, as someone who enjoys watching pitching and just like analyzing pitching, this was a great game to watch. And on the other hand, Gausman didn't pitch well or didn't pitch bad either for the Jays. It was just those 2 home runs that hurt him to Muncy and Will Smith in the 6th or the 7th inning that kind of iced the game for the Dodgers and really gave Yamamoto all the run support he needed. This game ended up being a 5-1 for the Dodgers, but I think this game kind of put Yamamoto on the map for, more of the casual fans that aren't really, always staying up for those West Coast games. This goes to show you what kind of a pitcher he is. And, he was an absolute workhorse, only throwing, well, I say only throwing, but 108 pitches through 9 innings is, you don't really see that kind of efficiency in today's game. And, for a game like this to happen in the World Series, I think it's pretty cool. Just goes to show you how different pitchers work. You see 100 pitches maybe in 5-6 innings, but to work through a 26, high 20s first pitch inning and to still finish with 100 pitches, that is like the definition of efficiency. And so I'd say for young pitchers out there, this was a great game to watch if you're trying to learn about pitching, because you definitely get your class in about the splitter with Gausman and Yamamoto being, big splitter guys. But just to see how these pitchers work, I think it was a great game to watch, and I very much enjoyed this one. Now, on the other hand, for Game 3, I didn't enjoy this one at all. This was, a game for the ages and not for the right reasons. This was, a Shohei dominance on one hand. He got on base 9 times. Mind you, 4 of those were intentional walks, but he was 4 for 4 with 2 doubles and 2 home runs. And the second one was, quite the game changer. Seranthony Dominguez basically put it on a tee for him to hit. It was an absolute meatball that was served up to Ohtani. And, it was crazy because Pete Walker had just come out there to, have a talk with him, kind of give him a break on, what was going on. And I think, he was probably telling him, hey, you don't have to give in here. We can go face the next guy. Obviously we had saw the Dodgers lineup was not hitting at all throughout this whole series. And I think you would take your chances with literally anybody else in this lineup except for Ohtani. And, first pitch, bomb. It sucked to say that, but, it kind of just happened. And I was not surprised at all that it did happen, because Shohei is just the best player on the planet. But it was, probably the worst situation that could have happened. But, fast forwarding to the 8th, from the 8th to the 17th inning, where nothing really happened but really bad approaches at the plate. Throughout this game, I was talking to my guy, AJ, and we were both saying this game is going to keep going because everybody is trying to end it with one swing. And, there's multiple opportunities where, guys on first and second and third, guy on second, guy on third, where all you need is a single to, either move the runner or, bunt him over. And, there was just really, really bad execution on both sides. And, it's it was really bad to watch. It was multiple chances. It was either like a weak pop up to the first baseman or the second baseman. And, there was a lot of swings that looked over anxious, and, they're trying to do too much, where, all you need is poke a single here. You don't need to rope a ball into the gap every single time. I know it's easier said than done. Hitting, like I've talked about multiple times before, is probably the hardest thing to do in sports. But you don't need to get big with your swings in those kind of situations. But it didn't really matter for Freddie in, dare I say, the 18th inning, where he had hit a massive home run to dead center field, and this ended the game. And, it's crazy, as, the Yankees fan I am. I kind of got, not PTSD because it wasn't the bases loaded, but just to see Freddie hit another walk-off, kind of brought back bad memories. But this is now back-to-back World Series where Freddie has hit a home run in extra innings, which is, kind of like an ESPN stat, but it's crazy to think about that, he hadn't been really doing much the whole game, but, when the lights are shining the brightest, comes up clutch. But this was an interesting game. We saw a whole bunch of arms come out and pitch for the Dodgers. Shout out Will Klein for 4 innings, throwing almost 70 pitches. I think it was 71 pitches. And I think they were talking about on the Fox broadcast that his previous high for pitches was like 32. So basically doubling that and a little more. And there was an article I read, as he would come in every inning, Dave Roberts would ask him, it's like, hey, how you feeling? And, he'd say good, because as long as you're out there pitching well, I think you got to keep performing. And he said, you get a little tired, your arm might feel a little gas, you're not feeling it in your legs. And he'd say, who's going to come out here and save me? I think that's like the biggest dog mentality, is that you're going to win this game for your team, being out there on the mound. And it's kind of a cool story that I saw that Sandy Koufax, because this game was in LA, he had come down to the clubhouse after the game, and the first person that he went to go talk to was Will Klein. And, that's just got to be the biggest, that's got to be one of the coolest things ever, is that having a legend like that, Sandy Koufax, who, mind you, I didn't even know was alive. I'm not even going to lie. I did not know he was alive. That is super cool that he was there. He was sitting, I think, in the front row, like just behind home plate. But to have a Dodger legend come up to you and say, like, have a talk with you after a performance like that, I think it's got to be one of the most uplifting moments he's probably had in his career, because that's definitely not happened to him at all. He wasn't, he's bounced around quite a bit, and I don't think anybody expected him to pitch in this game. And the same goes with Edgardo Enriquez. He pitched really well as well. Those are 2 guys that you just have stashed in the back of the bullpen to kind of mop up innings, but they had combined for, I think it was a 6 scoreless. So that's pretty huge in an 18-inning game where you use a lot of your weapons, and, kind of boosted a little bit of their confidence and, Dave Roberts' confidence in them to put them back in there. But this game was, it was quite an interesting one. I think it started at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for, the people over here. And I remember I went home at, I think, I was at a Boston Pizza watching this game. I think we had left at, 11:30, 12, and then watched the rest of that home. But the game finished at 3:30 in the morning. 3:30. That is absurd. I don't remember watching, I think it was the 2016 or 2017. I can't remember. But it was Dodgers and Red Sox. They had also played an 18-inning game, and Max Muncy had ended that with an opposite field home run against Nate Eovaldi at the time. But I can't believe these teams have played 18 innings in the same decade, basically. It was a wild game, and I'd seen a lot of people saying whoever wins the next game is going to win the series, because, that's a marathon that I don't think anybody was really expecting. And we could have had a position player come out there and pitch, but I was low-key. I was texting AJ. I was like, yo, I hope a position player comes in after Will Klein and then all madness ensues. Because at that point, I was all for the madness, and it was already like approaching 4 o'clock, so I'm like, why not just stay up a little more, have some fun with baseball? But unfortunately, we didn't get there. Freddie kind of ruined it, but I was glad to see that the game ended at a reasonable time. Moving on to Game 4, and this was Shohei Ohtani versus Shane Bieber. And, when I first saw this, just how the game had started, Ohtani was looking good. Velocity was up a little bit. And I was like, yeah, Jays have absolutely no chance in this one. And, I was wrong. Giving up a lot of contact, and, one of those contact was a Vlad hanging sweeper that absolutely got demolished into the left center stands. That was, it looks good coming in, but the spot that it finished and landed, not so good. Shohei ended up taking the L in this game. The Jays lose 6-2. But, both pitchers were giving up a lot of hard contact. Bieber was also dancing around with trouble as well in this game, but still managed to give them a solid outing. 5 1/3, only 1 run. Not a big strikeout guy. 3 walks, 3 strikeouts. But yeah, this was, it was dicey for both teams. And I think this is, we all know Ohtani as this really, really good pitcher, high strikeouts, does have his control issues time to time, but, he looked very much human. And this Jays lineup was able to get around that. This isn't a lineup that really strikes out much. They were putting the ball in play. And, it's always interesting to watch, as a pitcher, this lineup that, doesn't really swing and miss. I think there was a stat, I think it might have been during Game 4. Vlad had struck out, the first time on, I think it was 3 pitches. And he had more home runs than strikeouts at that point in the series. And that is unheard of in today's game where, it's either you walk, strike out, or hit a home run. 3 true outcomes. But, the Jays had brought back kind of the old school way of just putting the ball in play and playing, I guess, quote unquote, the right way. But this was quite a game to watch. Again, like a pitcher, I always like watching how pitchers navigate lineups, especially ones that, put the ball in play, and always trying to be a student of the game. I always like watching as much baseball as possible. It was a lot of fun when they would have the 4 games during the day starting at, 1 o'clock. And then, finishing up with a West Coast game at 10. I love those days. I'm going to miss it for quite a while until spring training rolls around. But, Game 4 was quite a big swing. Jays won 6-2. This was a game that I wasn't expecting the Jays to win at all. But here I am again. Jays kept surprising me this series, and this was quite a big swing. And the same thing continued in Game 5. Scoring started on the very first pitch from a Davis Schneider home run. This was someone who I don't think anybody was expecting to play, but with George Springer and his health in question, I think Schneider decided to, play it a little safe and put Davis in there for the leadoff spot and playing left field, and then got followed up with a Vladdy bomb. Couple batters later against Snell. This was not a great start for Snell yet again. 6 2/3, 6 hits, 5 runs, 4 walks, and 7 strikeouts. And this was someone that had been cruising through the earlier series, mind you. They were playing the Reds and the Brewers. But the Jays made Blake Snell work for everything. This is a very patient team, and it paid off. Got their hits and runs early and often, and it paid off in this game. But the main story here is Trey Yesavage. Trey Yesavage, learn the name. He's a 22-year-old rookie who has now made more starts in the playoffs than he did in the regular season. He was absolute nails. Absolute disgusting. He was, 7 innings, 3 hits, 1 run, 12 Ks, and no walks. I think that's a big thing, especially this was his first, start on the road. He had previous starts, obviously them all being at home, hyped up with the crowd, but, being here in a hostile environment, I think it was pretty cool to see. There wasn't much of a difference. He did look a lot better here than in game 1. There was a little bit of a pitch mix tweak. It was a lot more slider heavy in game 1. The split wasn't as sharp as we've previously seen it in other series, but everything was working. The splitter was disgusting. Slider / cutter, whatever you want to call it, was good. And then the fastball, top of the zone, bottom of the zone, pitch tunneling with the splitter at the bottom of the zone, making it fall off the plate. These Dodgers hitters were just absolutely lost. And, for everybody there, especially because it was at Dodger Stadium, you could definitely tell from, just the people that you saw on TV that were like, oh, why did you swing at that? Why did you swing? And I think people need to understand that this is the first kind of arm angle and stride length that people are seeing, and it's so unweird and so unorthodox. But, not to get into the nerdy side of pitching, but it's interesting for a casual fan to be watching compared to someone who kind of understands baseball a little more. But if I'll just throw it out there, there's a video I watched maybe 2-3 months ago from this YouTuber by the name of Lance Brzezowski, titled "Searching for the Next MLB Ace." And if you want to get a deeper dive into Trey Yesavage's mechanics, along with, I think the video also had Jonah Tong, and he's on the New York Mets, and then Peyton Tolley of the Boston Red Sox. I think it's a very informative video because it just goes to show you how different Trey Yesavage is from looks wise, and what he throws and how he throws it. Super cool. And I'm not gonna bore you with all the nerdy stuff, but if you want to get nerdy about Lil pitching, I highly suggest watching it. He's always made some good stuff that I enjoy watching. So there's that. But yeah, this was all the Trey Yesavage game. Jays won 6-1. Nothing matters but Trey Yesavage, and also making MLB history. I think he has now multiple starts of 10 plus strikeouts as a rookie in the playoffs, which it's got to be some kind of record. But Trey Yesavage was absolute nails in this game, and was hands down the reason why they won, because Dodgers couldn't hit a lick in this game. Now moving on to game 6, and this was probably one of the wildest games I've witnessed in a while. And this was a do or die for the Dodgers on the road. And this was Yamamoto on the mound for the Dodgers, versus Gausman. And we saw Springer come back in the lineup after dealing with some kind of, side oblique, back injury. Didn't really look good in game 3 after swinging. And that guy, I'm going to talk about him a little later, but man, he went through a lot this postseason. But on the other hand, Gausman unstarted for this game for the Jays, and had looked to be rolling. But in the third, Will Smith singled the run, and then with the bases loaded, Mookie had singled, scoring 2, and Dodgers were up 3-0. And everybody was kind of in shambles because Yamamoto was on the mound, but he had also been struggling with a little pitch count and navigating through traffic. He was pulled after only 6 innings and a pitch count at 96, and all Jays fans were, happy to see him go. He gave up 5 hits, 1 run, and that 1 run surprisingly came on a George Springer RBI. And, after being pulled, we saw Justin Robleski have a scoreless inning. And going into the 8th inning, we see Dave Roberts turn to Roki Sasaki to see if he can stretch Sasaki out for a 2-inning save. And it wasn't a pretty first inning for Sasaki. It was having trouble throwing strikes, but ended up getting out of it. Went back to see if he can get the 9th and final 3 outs, but again, wasn't too sharp this game. After hitting Kirk in the hand on a splitter, who then was, subbed out for Miles Straw, obviously, because Kirk is the slowest guy in the league. We saw Addison Barger hit an absolute missile into the gap, and it got stuck in the wall. And this is the play that everybody's talking about from Game 6, because this was a very important play. And, when something like this happens, outfielders are always told, in the grounds rules, when umpires are talking before the game with the managers, put your hands up immediately, up to, umpire's discretion. But usually when a ball like this happens, you usually get, 2 bases. But then it becomes, is there an effort to even grab the ball? Is it really actually stuck in there? But, this ball was scorched at 105 miles an hour straight into the base of the wall. And, I think it's going to get stuck there anytime, because we see balls all the time hit off the wall, because it's a firm wall out there in, as their fence, quote unquote. But, in real time, as this is all happening, Justin Dean doesn't immediately pick up the ball, and we all see Kike Hernandez throwing his arms up saying, "Oh, we can't get it, ground rule double," like, grounds rules kind of thing. But Barger keeps running, circling the bases, and everybody's screaming, because the Jays had tied the game. They're down, they're down 3-1 at this point. But yeah, it didn't really matter, because, umpires called them back as it is a ground rule double. And then we see Sasaki get pulled out of the game because, second and third, nobody out. Splitter was not splitting very well. Couldn't throw strikes with the fastball. It wasn't looking good. And then we saw who was warming up to come into this game, and it was Tyler Glasnow, which quite surprised me, because I was thinking who would be lined up to be their Game 7 starter, and it was going to be Glasnow. But he comes out of the pen with second and third and no outs. And on the very first pitch, as Ernie is a very aggressive hitter, and I think this was part of the game plan for the Dodgers, was to attack him in, obviously to get ground balls. But in this case, he threw him up and in, and it was a very soft pop out to first base. And here's the part that gets, Jays fans, or just fans of baseball, even more angry, but more specifically Jays fans. We have Jimenez up to the plate, and he hits a little blooper off the end of the bat that, Kike is charging in to make a play on, and he catches this ball in shallow left field at his chest. That's a very important point, at his chest. It wasn't at his shoe tops or, had to make a diving play. He caught this ball at his chest. And Barger, who is the runner on second, is stuck in no man's land and tries to retreat back to the base and ends up getting doubled off to end the game. That's a very, very important play. There was talks about, I saw a report in the post game that Barger had said he was, just overly aggressive as he was the tying run, trying to score. But in my opinion, that's just horrible base running. He was, antsing over to third base as his ball was being charged in by Kike. And you're always taught as a player to freeze on a line drive, and the play's right in front of him. He just has to turn around and watch Kike run in towards him to catch this fly ball, or not even fly ball, this soft line drive. And he doesn't get back in time, and the game's over. You leave runners on second and third they started off with no outs, but all of a sudden becomes 3 outs in the matter of 3 pitches. But I think the worst part here in this kind of situation is you have your postseason hero, the guy that basically brought you to the World Series, in George Springer, just waiting on deck, watching all of that unfold. And, it's kind of hard, watching those plays back because, obviously, you could have done so many different things differently. But I think there's just, the over anxiousness on second base, trying to, score the tying run, that really cost them the game. And, this all leads to a phenomenal Game 7, but this was a hard one to watch as Jays fans because, it got interesting really quick and then came crashing down just as fast. But this all leads to Game 7, and we had Shohei Ohtani start as the opener, and right away you could tell he didn't have his best stuff. We saw that from the first couple pitches, in my mind, from, back-to-back high curveballs that, weren't even close to the zone. But, no one's going to have their best stuff in Game 7 on short rest. And, after striking out Jimenez in the second, it looked a little better with the bases loaded. But in the third, Bo Bichette comes up with 2 guys on and unleashes a 3-run homer into dead center field, and Rogers Center erupted. Everybody erupted. I was watching the game with some friends. It was a friend's birthday, and everybody was screaming and jumping around. That whole sequence was just, it was oozing aura from, the bat flip, the slow trot, the stare down. The slow trot is, because Bo's hurt. But, the Jays jumped out to 3-0 lead, and that essentially knocked Ohtani out of the game. He only ended up going 2 1/3. And then we had Robleski come in, and this was interesting because there's a little scuffle with Robleski and Jimenez where he had come inside on Jimenez during an at-bat a couple times, and then eventually hit Jimenez. And, there was some jarring back and forth between the two, and benches ended up clearing, and I think it was completely pointless. I don't think Robleski is going to intentionally hit the 9-hitter in a Game 7 of the World Series. It was just a stupid interaction, completely pointless, but nobody got ejected or anything. But, the Dodgers did score in the 4th and 5th on sac fly, or the 4th and the 6th on sac flies to make it a 3-2 game for the Jays. They were slowly creeping back, but, the Jays got an insurance run from a Jimenez double, scoring Ernie, making it 4-2. But the Dodgers didn't stop. Trey Savage came out of the bullpen, and again, this was someone that, the velo was down. The splitter wasn't really looking good. It was kind of just floating. It didn't really have that same depth to it. But he came out of the pen on short rest, and in the 8th gets taken deep by Max Muncy. And, as I was watching this game with other people who, aren't that really close to baseball, and some knew absolutely nothing about baseball, they were starting to feel, the anxiousness and that stress that this game was starting to hold, because, Game 7, the winner takes all. It's a 1-run game now. And, they were inching closer and closer to that top of that lineup where you have Shohei Ohtani, where he can just do about everything. And, it was getting to that point. And in the 9th inning, with the Jays up 4-3, Jeff Hoffman comes in to close out the World Series for you. And after getting the first out, Miguel Rojas steps up to the plate. And this was someone who had been in the lineup just for a glove, with Andy Pages not hitting a beach ball. We had Edman playing center field. But this was a guy who was in there as their glove playing second base, and Hoffman throws him an inside slider, and Miguel Rojas hits it out to left field as a home run to tie the game. And I remember it was clear as day. I was watching this on the TV, and I out loud said, "No way!" Out of all people in this lineup, I think Rojas was probably the last guy you'd place a bet on to go deep in this game. And at this point, he might have won the World Series for you. And this was with one out in the ninth. Shohei lines out, and Will Smith, I think, strikes out after this. But you kind of have that exhale after that. But man, it was hard because your heart had just been ripped out. You were so close to winning, and now you might have to. You have to do it in the bottom of the ninth. And bottom of the ninth comes, and you have Vlad hit a liner to Edman in center field as an out. And on TV, it looked like the ball was going a lot further than it did in real time. But, as the ball's hit, you could always see like the people immediately stand up behind the plate thinking that it is a home run. And it wasn't. But moving on, Bo hits a single and instantly gets pinch ran for because of that knee problem. And then we have IKF come in and run for him. We have Barger walk against Snell, who's in at this point his second inning of work, but doesn't get out of the inning. And who comes in? Nobody else but Yoshinobu Yamamoto. And this was absolutely absurd to me. I saw it on TV, and I texted AJ and I said, no way Yamamoto is warming up right now. This guy had just thrown 96 pitches last night. And the Dodgers at this point had used all four of their starters in this game. It started with Ohtani, then went to Glasnow for an inning and a third. Then Snell, and now Yamamoto. It blows my mind that this guy was able to do this, because it's unheard of in today's day and age. But he comes in, and after hitting Kirk on a 1-2 count, on the hand, the bases were loaded, and here comes this situation again. All you need is a single or a fly ball, and the World Series is over, and it's all up to Dalton Varsho. He hits a sharp ground ball over to Miguel Rojas, almost knocks him over, and he throws it home to Will Smith, and it's a bang play at home, but IKF is out barely, and I mean absolutely barely. Will Smith had just been tippy-toeing around with the plate. And, this has caused another controversy with the baseball people, or not even baseball people. This is just, I'd say more so casual fans just saying, why didn't he score? When bases are loaded, usually infield is playing in. And the rule of thumb is that you're usually supposed to get off of the base as far as the third baseman is playing off. This is, to defend against a back pick and maybe some kind of pickoff play at third base. But as we see from an overhead camera, we see that IKF is barely off the base, and everybody is screaming and yelling on Twitter, X, saying that why isn't he off the base? And maybe he had got a bad jump or, a smaller secondary, but I think he did it right. There was also a post-game presser that came out saying that, he was advised to stay closer to the base But he did his job. He was playing, or he was positioned in the right position. He might have just got a bad jump, but I see that he's getting death threats, to his family, and that's not cool. As much as IKF sucked on the Yankees, he played his role very well. You never heard him complain. He always took accountability for his mistakes and whatnot. But this is one of those situations where he's out by half a foot, whatever it is, but he didn't do anything wrong in this situation. I think it's just people not really knowing what to look at or knowing really what the situation is. But once this had happened, it was 2 outs and Ernie pops the ball up, and it just had that feeling that it was going to be another long extra innings game of Game 7 in the World Series, which I don't know if I can't even recall the last time I watched a Game 7 World Series go into extras. So that would have been maybe a first for me, but the funny thing is the exact same thing happened to the Dodgers in the 10th with the force out at home, and then Seranthony Dominguez, who was who was stuff over control. Obviously, he escaped the inning, and it was completely unheard of that. I wasn't expecting it to come out of that unscathed, but he did. And we go to the 11th, and the Jays bring in Shane Bieber, and getting 2 quick outs of Rojas and Shohei Ohtani. Will Smith comes up, and Jays fans probably want to plug your ears. Bieber throws an absolute hanging curveball to Will Smith and demolishes it into left field, putting the Dodgers up 5-4. And this was essentially all the run support Yamamoto needed. After giving up a leadoff double to Vlad in the bottom of the 10th, IKF bunts him over. And that was another thing I see people complaining about is, why is IKF bunting? That is 1,010,000,000% a bunt situation after a leadoff double. So Vlad's over to third. Barger ends up walking, and Kirk is up to the plate. And he could either be the hero, or he can tie the game or win. And he breaks his bat on a ground ball to Mookie at short, turns a double play, and your Dodgers are the 2025 World Series champions, and they are the first team to repeat since the 1999-2000 Yankees, which is kind of crazy. This was an absolute insane World Series. Very entertaining, I'm not going to lie. From going back and forth to some games to the absolute dominance in Yamamoto's starts. I truly love this World Series. It was hard being someone that lives in Canada and more importantly Toronto, just to see how hurt and emotional fans were after this game. But this was, I think, a real eye-opener for, the rest of the league. But it poses a lot of questions for, the Jays moving forward. I'm going to touch on those just quickly in a second, but I just want to run through a couple of things that, I found crazy throughout this series. First off, Yamamoto coming in on not even a day of rest and throwing the first pitch that he threw a 93 mile an hour splitter. And he usually averages, 90 to 92 on that pitch. So the fact that he was getting a little more velo on the split, the fastball was still, 97, 98. He deservedly won World Series MVP. Like that, it couldn't have gone to anybody else at that point. Dodgers batted 198 through this series and still won. That's probably the stat that hurts the Jays the most. It was more so just timely hitting and taking advantage of the situation. because 198 is, I think, the lowest in World Series history for a team that had won. But, moving on to more of a positive note, Ernie Clement set the postseason hits record at 30, and Vlad coming in tied at second with 28, third, because Randy Arozarena had 29 a few years ago. But, for a guy that not many people knew coming into the season, I think Ernie has won a lot of fans over with, just his tenacity at the plate and how he plays a game. He's a ball player, as some would say. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to George Springer. This guy's body was absolutely cooked. From getting a ball straight to his knee to his back, and I think he was dealing with the wrist thing as well at some point. But the fact that this guy was able to still get in there and contribute in some kind of way is quite shocking. And just it goes to show you how much he wanted it, because I think he had been told that he wasn't going to be playing in those couple games where, he needed to give his body a rest, because he had probably gone through quite a bit and was in probably an excruciating amount of pain. But that closes it out for baseball for now. And I said I was going to touch on some of the last things for the Jays, but I was thinking about is what happens now that the season's over for the Jays. I know they have some big free agents. Most important is Bo Bichette. Could this have been Bo Bichette's last game as a Blue Jay? Same thing goes for Shane Bieber. I know he has an opt-in or opt-out of, I think it's 14 million. I can't remember correctly, but I think it is 14. But I think he pitched well enough, outside of hanging that breaking ball to Will Smith. I think he showed enough to get a larger contract somewhere, but he could weigh out the option of, coming back to the Jays because they did reach the World Series. And could it be a 1-year contract and have another opt out, or does he want more of a get his bag kind of deal where it's a multi-year deal? Should be interesting to see how that plays out. And then Max Scherzer, didn't talk much about him, but he pitched really well in this World Series. There already was an interview that came out saying that this is not the last time you'll see him pitch. But for what team is most important, because at his age, it has to be a contender. I could very much see him coming back with the Jays, but yeah, it all depends on money, I think. I think it's money and, obviously which team, but I think the Jays have the upper hand because they made the World Series. It just comes down to a money value at the end of the day. But man, this was an entertaining World Series. I feel like I keep saying that over and over again because it just was. Lots of storylines, lots of, narratives that were played, a lot of controversy that had gone back and forth. But Dodgers are champs again. We'll see next year if they three-peat. I'm crossing my fingers. I hope they don't. But I guess this closes out the MLB season for now. We're gonna be moving forward still with postseason content, or not postseason, off-season content. Getting into some free agent stuff. So we're not going away anytime soon. Might have a couple interviews lined up with some people. I've already got some people in mind, so stay tuned in for that. But with that being said, I appreciate you all for tuning in. This was a great season. I learned a lot through watching baseball, getting to interview a lot of people, and hearing feedback from all of you. So I greatly appreciate it. I'm definitely taking all of those notes and putting them into how I can make this podcast better for everybody next season. So, I really appreciate you all for tuning in, whether that be on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube for all the videos that have come out. I appreciate each and every one of you guys for listening. And, this is just season 1. We'll be back next season for stuff even better. But with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thank you.